Long video today, how the U.S. can pay off its national debt. Discusses some preliminary solutions for this. Now, I think that there's two possible scenarios that can happen. One of them is that we can focus on working on it right now. And if you look at, I think it's U.S. national debt is $17 trillion. If you look at $17 trillion and you say we're going to pay it off in 10 years, you have a cost of $1.7 trillion a year, right? Now I know that people will be like, whoa, that's a lot to pay off each year, and that is, it's very costly, right? But the idea is that you can actually break it down, and in a decade you can be significantly better off than before. In fact, even if you were to say, let's make an effort over the next 10 years to break the debt down below 10 trillion, then you would be paying 7 trillion off in the next 10 years, and of course that would be 0.7 trillion. There are ways to make it more manageable. It is not impossible. What cannot happen, what cannot continue to happen, is kicking the can down the road. And if that continues to happen, then it doesn't matter, because what's going to happen is it just keeps becoming more and more to pay off. So you have two scenarios here. You can pay it off now and choose the path that hurts least. And not pay it off now as in pay all of it off, but start making sacrifices. This is when it'll be easy to do, by the way. Start making sacrifices now that begin to trim it and cut it back. And then the other choice, of course, is when we're forced to cut back. That's what Europe's going through right now. And it's creating hell for a lot of the employees and a lot of the workers. Because the thing is that when you're able to prepare for it, you can allocate resources where they need to go, right? But when you sit there and you basically the market forces you to pay back the national debt, you can't, and people suffer. Now, I don't want to be wrong, and I don't want to hurt many people out here who are watching this video, but I'm going to tell you that if this is not addressed sooner rather than later, there are going to be many people who suffer, and those people are not going to be okay suffering. They're going to take out their suffering on others, which are going to take their suffering out on others, etc., 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 right? It's going to become an ugly mess. It's important, especially if you care about this, or if you have friends who don't think it's a big issue, to share this with them, because it's not something that's going to be easy in the long run if it's not we choose to do this now. You got to think about that when you hear these politicians talk, okay? Because if they're not actually addressing the real issue, they're just pretending like it doesn't exist. Those are not people you want to vote for. Now, this is not Jesus talking in this red. What this is, basically, is the second scenario. We're forced. It starts here, and everything else happens a little bit different. Or we can start here, and we never really have to hit this red. Okay, there's a couple of options. These are some starting ideas in the sense that these are some ideas that would reduce some of the cost, would reduce some of where we're putting money at, so that we could put more money to the debt. I'll give you a good example right off the bat. Is we are losing, I think I calculated, about $22 billion a year to oil exports. I'm sorry, oil imports. Okay? Well, if I take 22 billion and I multiply that times 12, I get over $250 billion. So if we're not sending that money overseas, that could be money going to our debt. Remember, one of the figures, if we wanted to pay it off in 10 years, was 1.7 trillion. Okay? The other figure was 0.7, which would be 700 billion. Well, $250 billion out of 700 is a little bit over, actually a little bit over a third. Okay? Out of 1.7 trillion, we still have a ways to go. We will definitely have to increase exports some. So here's a couple of ideas to start out. First of all, transportation upgrade. I say here, not roads and rail. We already have roads and rail, but one of the building blocks to economic success is transportation architecture. Okay, and you want to see empires rise. It's transportation. That's part. You can allocate resources around drones. Okay, when I'm talking about this, I didn't put it on the slide for those of you who are listening, but it's drones, right? drones have a potential to offer us cheap transportation, which will allow us to transport certain resources. It is true, some resources, probably like oil, it's going to have to go by rail or semi, etc. But drones, not so much. They'll be able to transport other resources that could save time. Okay, this is a huge industry. It can reduce time. It can reduce cost. It is, I would even agree with people who say it's deflationary, and we'll get into why that's good in a second. Why deflation is not bad. I'm going to answer why deflation is not bad in just a second. Okay. But transportation upgrade will be very useful. This is one of the areas in the 50s that the government invested money in our highway system that actually paid off. In other words, we actually got a very good return. Okay? It's not something that the government can't invest in some of these drone companies, right? And it can just spread it around. Look, we can create index funds that invest in multiple industries. So there's no reason why we can't do the same thing in, oh, here's drone industries, here's the top 10 or top 20 or top 50 companies. Here, let's put some money across the board. And more money will go to people who come up with solutions. Yes, it's true, we don't want these people to just punch out and retire. It's not what we're looking for. And by the way, it is true that when the government invests money in industries, people should be, because it's taxpayer money, they should be held accountable. In other words, if they just take the money and, oh, well, who cares, I don't care about the business, they should go to prison. I mean, it's like, if you're going to take government money, then you're going to actually go get out there and solve the problem, right? You just don't get to take it and do whatever you want. Okay. Incentivize price deflation of necessities. So let me explain. When people see their healthcare, food, housing, and other necessities become cheaper, they don't see tax increases in the same light as when everything is becoming expensive. This is basic human behavior. This is one of the mistakes the government is currently making, and the Federal Reserve is making, and all of them. They're so worried about deflation, partially because of the national debt. They know that inflation is one of the ways in which you can cheat paying off the national debt. Basically, you kind of inflate the dollar, and the debt overall, what you owe, is less. Actually, the Federal Reserve is engaging, and so is the U.S. is engaging here and being stupid, right? Actually, the better way to pay off the national debt, you could instigate a value-added tax, let's say of 20%. All of that value-added tax could go to the national debt. Here's the key, though. If prices of goods are falling, let's say healthcare, we talked about Theranos, the blood company. So it used to cost you $100. Now it costs you, let's say in our hypothetical example, $15. So you used to pay $100 to get a blood test, and you had to do those 2 times a year. So that's $200. But now it only costs you $15. So now it's $30. So you're paying $200, now you're paying $30. So you're saving $170. What would happen if the government instigated a 20% value-added tax on that $30? Right? Well, you would pay an extra $6. So you're still paying you're paying $36, but you're not paying $200. So you still feel like you're saving money, right? Because you are. But 20% of what you're purchasing is going to a value-added tax, and that value-added tax is going to pay off the national debt. It doesn't feel like a sacrifice, right? Because the price of goods dropped. It's the same thing with LEO Motors. As a case in point, most cars cost over $10,000. But LE Motors cost $6,800. Well, let's suppose the government's like, okay, well, this is a cheaper good, which is good, but let's go ahead and let's put a 20% tax on that. Right? So $6,800, 10% of that would be $680. Okay? So you can crunch the numbers. I believe it's what, $1,360 of a value-added tax that you would pay. But it's still cheaper, and you're still getting good gas mileage on that car, right? And so that the benefit's still there, and because of the reduced cost, it still feels like you're saving money because you are, right? So when there's price deflation of necessities, by raising or adding a value-added tax to it, it doesn't feel, if the deflation overall is still less, it doesn't feel like a loss to the consumer. Okay? This could happen all over the place. And therefore you would want to encourage price deflation. By the way, I would argue that price deflation actually will lead in the long run, if you had 10 years of that. Now it takes about 10 years. prices falling, and it will lead in the long run to actually more consumption, because since goods are becoming cheaper, consumers have confidence. The reason why consumers aren't spending right now is because even though you can say there's been deflation for 10 years, it doesn't feel like there has been. And no, the price of goods is not falling. I have inflation calculators that I've been keeping, private inflation calculators of goods and services that I pay for the last 11 years, and goods have not been falling. See, they're just flat out not telling the truth. That's why we're not seeing price deflation. If we saw price deflation, real true price deflation, you would see more spending, but you're not going to see that. This right here is the most painless of this list, because again, still the consumer feels like he or she is winning, right? They don't feel like they're sacrificing. Next one is energy independence. This one would hurt. What's funny though is that this idea was proposed, one of the people that proposed this idea was Ross Perot. He wanted to tax gasoline. And he's a Texan. We make a lot of money off of oil, but we still want there to be a tax on oil. We know why. Because we still want to be energy independent. That's a bigger goal for all of the US. It provides more jobs. What's funny is that if we implemented it then, it wouldn't have been so much of a sacrifice, and where would we have been in 2000? Okay. Problem is, we can sit around talking about where we could have been. It's not going to get us anywhere. So it's just something that we have to implement now. And what this means is tacking on $1 a gallon for taxes, and that $1 a gallon goes into, for instance, building, let's say, electric recharging stations all over the country, or natural gas infrastructure to where we can transport that. There's natural gas vehicles. They're also very good. Natural gas is very cheap right now, right? The thing is, in capitalism, competition stimulates innovation. You don't want oil-based cars to only be what's out there. You want electric, you want natural gas, you want oil-based. Supposedly there's hydrogen-powered cars. I haven't seen these yet, but maybe they exist, so you want them too, right? Because the idea is the more competition, the more each group's going to innovate to try to win over consumers. If you only have one type of car, oil-based cars, there's very little demand for innovation. Right? Because it's like, they have to buy our cars. Then you can charge whatever prices you want, right? It's not a good thing. Energy independence. We've got to stop importing oil. I believe we import $22 billion worth of oil a month. So you're talking about over $250 billion of our imports are caused by oil. It's not a good thing. That will cut our trade deficit down. Now, what I put here in red, like I said, this is not Jesus talking, but what I think is going to end up happening before, and I predict, is that since borrowing is cheap, the government will continue to do it. And if citizens just don't care. Most of you aren't going to watch this video and going to go write to your senators and your representative in the House of Representatives, or the president, or your governor, right? You're just not going to care. You'll be like, who cares? Doesn't matter, right? That's what happens. That's what most people in America will do, right? So what will eventually happen is market force will make it happen. This will not happen. They will actually do the opposite of price deflation. They will do inflation, which will hurt. You'll get poor. Energy independence, I don't know whether they'll do or not, but they'll do it in a way that basically it's inflation to you, and it's going to really hurt. This is going to hurt either way, but hey, again, you look back at it and say, hey, if we had done it when Ross Perot did it, it would have been less painful, right? It's going to be painful, more painful this year than it would have been if we did it then. But let me tell you, 10 years from now, it would be less painful to do it now than 10 years from now. Think about it, right? One of the keys to success is a sense of urgency. Right? You don't kick the can down the road, you do now, because there is no right time to do something. And I'm going to go into a little bit more details about the energy independence here. So that's what I predict, is that basically there will be some sovereign debt crisis, who knows what. It will get ugly. And yeah, you may actually have what happened in Mexico, where after their peso was devalued, you had people who were in a level of poverty that you don't see in America, but you're going to. Some of the people watching this video may end up being in that type of poverty. There is no protection against it. Because you don't understand, it was a fundamentally infrastructure problem. What happens when you have a crisis like that is it's game over for everyone. And even the rich have a lower standard of living. It's, like I said, everybody's in poverty at that point in time. And that could happen. And that could really happen. And the more you kick the can down the road, you're guaranteeing it, right? So based on a few estimates, we import approximately $22 billion in oil a month. Our trade deficit ranges from $40 to $50 billion. As you can see, that would cut our trade deficit down. Electric cars create electric energy demand local, that's in the US, reducing the need for oil imports. In addition, the United States produces oil and can use some of its own oil. Okay, so we don't really need to import oil once we get enough electric cars on the road or enough natural gas cars on the road. Also, cars like LEO Motors reduce oil usage, excellent, by 30 to 60%, relative, of course, to the commuter car being compared. Now, here's why I hate Republicans and Democrats. I've made it very clear on this channel I am apolitical. I hate both. When Tesla Motors first came out, people thought I was crazy. I was like, oh, this is great. This is the best stock ever. You know, this is going to be the company that changes the world. People were like, no, it's not. Tesla Motors will never succeed. This was around the time that people were sinking, politicians specifically, were sinking money into Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase. And we're talking about $25 billion that they were sinking money into. It's no small chunk of change, right? I think most of us can acknowledge that. Why didn't they take a few billion and put it into Tesla? And you say, well, what would have happened if the company failed? Well, let's just suppose hypothetically that they put in $1 billion and the company failed. They lose $1 billion. Do you think that anybody in America is better off because they put $25 billion in Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan Chase? Remember, these are institutions that have bet against their clients. Why you would ever do business with them, I don't know. And suppose that they took $1 billion and they spread it out across several companies who had electric cars, such as Nissan, because there's the Nissan Leaf. They did put money into GM, but again, GM is a corrupt company themselves. They had electric cars way back in the day and they got rid of them. I mean, we have to question why they did that. I understand that the EV cars were very expensive. They were $250,000+. I get it. They were probably never going to recoup that. But still, they had the technology to work on and improve, right? So really, fundamentally, there were some options. And then once the market took off, now people think Tesla Motors is a great idea. Typical. By the way, I always find it funny when people talk about efficient market hypothesis. I'm like, if the efficient market hypothesis was true, there are times when the market is right. On an individual, let's say, commodity level, sometimes it is right. But you have to understand that part of value investors make a lot of money betting on the fact that the market temporarily is wrong. So the market in the long run is right, but the market temporarily can be very wrong. That's what happens when you have panics and people, oversell. They forget the fact that there's still value there. Well, it's the same thing with Tesla Motors. When it fell to like, $17, $18 a share, I mean, I knew this thing is on sale. This is probably going to be one of the best times to buy. And the risk was worth it, right? Because even if it failed, well, there's going to be problems if we're not going to get off of oil, right? But notice how similar this is to LEO Motors. They're having trouble getting funding. Why? Stop and think about these for a while, right? Well, my Democrats and Republican friends disagreed. They're like, no, we shouldn't put money into the market. No, we shouldn't invest in the infrastructure, even though we know $22 billion in savings is no joke. I mean, we don't have to notice, we're not inflating any dollars here. Okay? These are the same people, by the way, who thought Pets.com was a great idea. This is in the dot-com bust, for those of you who don't know. It IPO'd at $82 million. It only had revenues of $600,000. That's a price-to-earning ratio way over 100. These are the people who, and that's why I hate Republicans and Democrats, they kick the can down the road. They just do. That's all they do. They're always talking about, well, we can't do that, and here's the reason why we can't do that. Okay, you can keep coming up with the reasons all day long of why we can't, but we're going to have to do something, or you're going to see us as a third world country before it's over. You don't get to maintain your standard of living. We live in a competitive global world. So, I'll go back to this. This is one option, and this is the best option. We have to target $1.7 trillion a year to pay it off in 10 years. Okay? It's better to sacrifice now. And as we see, with price deflation, there are certain things that we can do, and we can start moving in the right direction. Or, We can wait until we have no other choice. Mark my words, if we pick the second choice, where it's we have no other choice to do it, it is going to hurt, and it is going to hurt everyone. If you're on disability, it's going to hurt you very bad. If you're retired, it's going to hurt you very bad. If you're a baby boomer, it's going to hurt you very bad. Same thing Gen X, same thing Gen Y. And everybody, there is no way that you're not going to sacrifice. Every single person will be hurting. So let's go ahead and just do it today. Let's go ahead and pay it off. Let's start working on it. Make our payment plans. If we had done what Ross Perot said back in the day, it was only $4 trillion then. Where would we be right now? And that's my point. Look at where we're at in 2015. Where are we going to be in 2025? If we don't work on it today, then 2025 is going to be even worse. And there's going to come a point, and we may not get to 2025, that people are not going to lend to us anymore. And it is going to be cutting back. I'm going to tell you, it is going to be ugly. This is the option that you choose. And as you see, there are plenty of things to do. This is just starting points. There are others. And there's even some things that would actually be easy for consumers. So there's no reason not to do this earlier. So go ahead and share this video with anyone who doesn't think it's that serious. Tell them to develop an attention span and actually watch the full thing. But the fact is, if it doesn't happen earlier, sooner I should say, rather than later, it is going to be a mess for everyone. There's not going to be anyone who's immune.